Hello and welcome back to the channel. If this doesn't give it away, I don't know what will. If you don't like mixing gas and slapping ass and the sound of a 500 two-stroke, you're on the wrong channel, and I suggest you go and do some knitting. This is gonna be spicy. This is gonna be spicy. So what is this? This is a 1987 KX500 engine, one of the most powerful motocross bikes ever made, still to this day. That is a fact. There's a 2008 KX250F frame, so there's a 4-stroke later frame with a 1987 KX500 engine. This thing doesn't look like a 2008 KX250F, and the reason being is because it's fully dressed in 2017 plastics. It's got a 2017 rear subframe and it has a full set of 2017 plastic. Okay, let's go back in time. We're going to look through some photos and some video footage of how this was built, and then later on in the episode I'll reveal to you why it was built and its intended purpose. Right, first things first, there are several points of contact on the frame. The rear swing arm, the headstock, 2 mounting bolts. The first thing, and one of the biggest jobs, is actually boring the back of the engine out to take the larger bolt that holds the swing arm on the later frame. So the engine casing has been bored out to take that large bolt hole. I didn't get any video footage of that, so you'll have to forgive me for that, but I do have another bike that I'm going to build. When I do that, I'll get that footage. The lower frame rails of the bike. So one of the key things is the Y-piece. So the Y-piece, if I just turn this, is what I refer to as that piece there. Now, the Y-piece actually needs to be cut and moved up. Because the 2-stroke exhaust comes out the centre, the 4-stroke exhaust comes over the top of the Y-piece. So there's a lot of extensive work to actually do to the frame to remake these lower frame rails, because they need to be made longer and that Y-piece needs moving up. So they are probably the hardest tasks of building this bike with parts that you can't get off the shelf. The next bits of fabrication would be the 2 other engine mounting bolts and the rear head state engine mounting bolt. Now that rear head state engine mounting bolt is welded to the frame, so you need to cut off a lug that's mounted to the frame and then add a bracket that goes between the two. I made mine in stainless. You can make them in pretty much anything you like. They don't need to be overly thick. I believe the original ones are just a thin piece of aluminium. Okay, so now we've mounted our engine in our frame, we've modified the frame rail. The next thing to do would be to put the subframe on the back end. As I said before, this isn't the correct subframe for the front half of this frame. This is a later style subframe, and the reason being is because all of the plastics at the back and the airbox and the back of the seat mount to that subframe. So to make my bike look more modern, I've used a later subframe attached to the front of an earlier frame. The things to modify: the bracket that goes onto the frame at the lower, and just below the fuel tank there's a modification there. There's a little bit of trickery cutting a bracket at the other side, so we've had to remake some brackets, unpick a few bits and pieces, make our own brackets, and actually the frames aren't that far out. They were quite close to fitting as unmodified, but to make it right and look correct, there was a few brackets that were modified, and then that actually fit really nicely. One of the next tasks was the exhaust. Now this is a CR500 pipe, and the reason being is, on a factory KX500, the exhaust actually goes up and along the side of the fuel tank, and it does not work at all. My plan of attack at a later date is to fully remake this exhaust. I'll get into that further down the line, but this pipe works absolutely fine for anybody doing this conversion. The only thing that I did have to do was, as the exhaust comes out, the fitting that goes into the cylinder head is completely wrong. On the CR pipe, I would describe it as a female, and on the KX pipe, the cylinder head, I would describe as a male. So there was an adapter that went from male to female for the CR pipe to fit inside. The other thing as well, there was a slight difference in the curve at the front pipe. I had two little cuts to make to spin the rotation round, and that was the majority of the pipe done. The next thing to do was modify the engine, so the water pipe originally on the 500 comes out on the side here. Now if I had my water pipe in there, a bit hard to see, but the clearance, it just wouldn't work. So I've repositioned the water pipe on the barrel further forward to make clearance for the water pipe feed into there. The other thing as well, this is an original Pro Circuit CR500 pipe, and the brackets at the back didn't line up with the brackets on the subframe. So the next thing to do was make some brackets on the exhaust that then looked original and married up to mounting points that were on the subframe for the rear silencer. And I think you'll agree that pretty much looks like it should be there. One of the next big tasks is the radiators. Now, when you cut the Y-piece, because you're moving that area up, the radiator has to become physically shorter. I could not use the 250F radiators because they're designed for the Y-piece to be lower. So what this is a completely custom radiator that I've made to fit this bike. Now, there were two bikes that were built when this bike was done. There was a 250 and mine, the 500. And what we found was on the other 250 that we built, we used some radiators off a 1997 two-stroke 250. The reason being is because they are happy with that pipe being where it is, and that radiator then can become shorter. So these shrouds are actually off the 1996, 97 KX250 two-stroke, and then the radiators are completely made custom. The top of the radiator has a water temperature sensor in it, and the bottom of the radiators are designed to follow the frame as closely as possible. Another reason that I went down the complete custom radiator route is because the only part of the frame that mounts the plastic is here. Everything else is mounted on the radiator and on the fuel tank. Now, I'd always planned on running a custom fuel tank. The reason being is the top of the spark plug is very close to the bottom of the fuel tank. One of the cheats that people do is they actually warm up the bottom of the fuel tank and push the base of the fuel tank up to allow clearance for the spark plug. I didn't want to do that. My plan of attack was to go down the route of a full custom fuel tank and build something that, because I plan on using this bike for a bit of enduro riding, I wanted a decent sized capacity fuel tank. So let's get into the fuel tank. First things first, this here is a factory KX250F thread cap. So these thread caps were completely machined to replicate the exact thread cap that was originally on the bike. I wanted to keep the bike as original as possible. When you're building something, my end goal is always to make it look as if Kawasaki built it that way. As I've already said, the plan of attack is to use it for some enduro riding as well as other bits and pieces. I'm going to get into that. But one of the main things is I wanted a decent capacity. It had to pick up the mounting points to hold the plastics on, follow the shape as nicely as possible to the frame, and then make it quite angular. You see some round pressed aluminium fuel tanks. I'm not a fan of them. It's my personal preference. I wanted to make it quite angular. If you look at the lines on the bike, everything else is quite sharp. I don't think there's many things that are round on there, but I also needed to make it tie into the bike. When I first designed the tank, this piece on the back of the tank was actually flat. I didn't like that. It was too much of a huge flat area, so I put a couple of extra kits in it to make that correct. What I am using as a stop tap is a KTM 1290 stop tap on the bottom of the fuel tank. I hope you're enjoying the video on the KX, and we're going to get back to that in a minute. Pretty sure if you're liking what you're seeing on the KX and you're into motorbikes, you're going to like this next thing. This is something that we have advertised on our web shop. These are can holders, absolutely perfect for the garage wall, the back of your race van, or just generally tidying up your workshop. I go to race meets all the time. I had these in the back of the van. I get people coming up to me and they're saying, oh, they're really good. Can we buy them off you? Do you sell them? So I've taken the time to make a batch of these up. I'm going to see how well they sell. So these are advertised on our web shop. I'll leave a link in the description below, so feel free to head over there, have a look at these. They're made from 3mm aluminium, really good quality, all TIG welded, manufactured here in-house at K2, and yeah, just a good, nice thing to keep everything clean and tidy, and you know where it is in the back of your van, workshop, garage, whatever. Another thing as well that we have is the oil holder. So this is designed for 1 litre oil bottles. Same again, I go to race meets. I always take oil with me. I didn't have anywhere to put it. I thought, let's make something for the back of the van. When I get there, people are always asking me, oh, where do you buy them from? If the K2 didn't give it away, and the K2 on the side of the van, yeah. Anyway, so basically, this carries a 1 litre oil bottle, really easy fitment, couple of screws, it slides into place, and yeah, absolutely perfect. Like I said before, I'll leave a link in the description below to the website. Feel free to go over there and check out these products. Let's get back to the KX. Diesel! I take my eyes off you for 2 minutes. And what's this? What's this? What's this? What is it? You've nicked my knickknacks. Hey! You bad dog. Diesel, come here. I have to keep my eyes on you, can't I? Hey? I have to keep my eyes on you. Where are you going now? Don't you be nicking anything? Right, so the next thing you can see, a removable clutch cover. Now, from what I read, the factory race team for the KX500 modified them for clutch adjustment at the side of the track. If I didn't have a 2-piece clutch cover on the side of the engine, what it would mean, if I ever have a problem with the clutch, need to adjust it, need to replace it, I'd have to take the motor out of the frame. So one of the things I wanted to do was put a 2-piece clutch cover on there. That meant extensive machining, so a ring had to be cut, the engine casing had to be cut, put in the milling machine, made sure it was completely flat, machined the depth of the ring to make sure the ring was the correct depth to clear the outer clutch baskets, etc, etc. So that was quite a biggish job to do. One of the things as well, this is a 2014-2000 KX450F clutch cover, because the clutch was bigger, and the only thing that was really close was the bolt that goes next to the water pump housing. The other things as well that had to be machined. Now, the engine is really wide. So what that meant was I couldn't utilize the original brake pedal. You can actually see from the top, there's quite a curve sticking out in that brake lever. So what I had to do was have the brake lever completely custom made. The other thing as well was the kickstart. Now the kickstart, I wanted to follow the shape of the frame. The spline fitment on the engine side meant that when the kickstart was on, it was leant down too far. It's actually quite a short kickstart. You need to have a bit of something about you to kick it. But as long as you find TDC, the kickstart could probably do to be a little bit longer, but I've never had a problem starting the bike. I'm not going to worry about it. And in the case of worrying about starting the bike, at the time when the motor was built, I also added a decomp valve to the head. I actually don't use the decomp valve in the head. I find it easier to start without the decomp valve. But if I did have it, if I did have a problem, I could use the decomp valve on the side of the head. You simply push it in, and as you kick it, it just automatically releases and clicks out. If you look around, what you can see is all of the fork yokes, the lowers of the forks are all cerakoted, the full engine is all cerakoted, the cylinder head, all of the parts like the brakes, the brake master cylinder, the brake calipers, everything is all cerakoted. That was all removed, cleaned, shot blasted, sent away and fully coated. The other thing as well, every single bolt in that engine, including all of the studs, the bolts that hold the discs on, the chain adjuster, absolutely every bolt that holds the fairing on, they are all titanium. The bolts that go through the pinch bolts, they're the only that are left to change in the clamps, but every single bolt on that bike is titanium. They were all sent to the same place as well, because I got various different suppliers for different bolts, and I had all of the bolts colour matched throughout. Another thing, all of the anodized parts, so all of the anodized parts matched in colour, they were all sent away as well, same place, to get them colour matched. I think if you're gonna do a job, you've got to do it right. The front forks, the rear shock, that was fully rebuilt. That was sent to a company in, I think they're in Halifax, called Brooks Suspension. I told them what I was doing. I said, I'm putting a 500 in, I'm doing this, I want to do some enduro riding. So it's all been revalved and that's all been sorted, ready to be ridden. I got this engine from a guy who had supposedly rebuilt it. And the news that I got from a guy called Steve Wells was this.
Hi Dominic, I'm just going through your engine at the moment. I've just put the bearings all in the cases and stuff like that. I did that yesterday. But we've got a few major problems. I thought this engine had all been checked and stuff like that, but I'm actually going through it now. And if you look at the crankshaft is now in the main bearing, but it has lift, if you can see that. So the journal here on the other side of the crankshaft is worn, so it doesn't fit. I'll try and get it so I can show you it, to be honest, but if you can see this. So that's worn. So someone's fitted a new rod to a crankshaft that has a worn journal. Worse than that is the gearbox. Now, the output shaft here, if you can see that where it's seized, that is the second gear, which is here, which second gear has seized on the shaft. Now, I've just had to beat this off with a hammer because the gear was seized on the shaft, but also on the input shaft. If you see there, on that show, you can even see where the bits of metal have started to melt. That gear there if you see all that in there, has seized on that shaft. So that's going to need both shafts and 2 gears, and the crankshaft stripping back apart again, and the crankshaft web being sent off I get these tungsten sprayed and then ground back. So it is salvageable, but can you give me a call, mate? Let me know what you think. Cheers, bud.
So after receiving that news, in a nutshell, the bottom end of the engine needed a full rebuild. I had intended to rebuild the motor myself, but because Steve had all the parts, it was just easier to send it down to him. I found him through Kawasaki, highly recommended, and I highly recommend the guy as well. He's been absolutely fantastic. So the next plan of attack was a new barrel. So I needed to find a new barrel that came from the Netherlands, from a guy who I found online, and a load of new parts Kawasaki supplied. Luckily, they had the main shaft inputs and outputs, and then Steve had the rest of the parts to do all the gears. So now we've got a fully rebuilt motor ready to go in and rip it.
That front wheel just came up for fun then.
You what?
That front wheel just came up for fun then.
It's just bad, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to reveal the intended use for this motorbike, and this is it. If you're still here at this point, thanks very much for watching. I've covered loads on the bike. I'm sure there's tons that I've missed. I know straight off the top of my head, the air boot in the back end's off a Honda. I've not covered stuff like that. If you want to see some more detail, drop some comments below and let me know. I'll look to do that. Put a lot of time and effort and passion into this bike, as I'm pretty sure you can tell. There's going to be more footage on this and more footage on the hill climb. I'm not going to fully tell you what we're doing with it. You're going to have to tune into episode 2 to see that one. This is different to our usual fabrication videos. If you really like this, hit the like button and let us know which is it that you prefer. If you've not already, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps with all the YouTube algorithm, whatever it may be, the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, click like, subscribe, and that way we know that you're enjoying what we're doing. Next week I plan on getting back on the patrol, so next week's episode will be, all being well, the first episode on the patrol as we start to build the tray. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cup of tea time, Diesel. Yorkshire tea. We like Yorkshire tea because we're Yorkshire people. Diesel, why the long face? Because it's the only one I've got. Good boy. Whenever is speed on a motorbike on a near vertical hill that's chopped up ever going to be a problem? Yeah, if I smell really hard, I can definitely smell the antiseptic already. What do you think? What do you think?